We continue with Holy Bible reading to request divine union, part 108. And I will say that now we've basically reached the middle of the Holy Bible. And we read most of the New Testament, and we'll be starting a little bit later with the book of Revelation. But this is chapter 10 of 1 Maccabee. Alexander appoints Jonathan as high priest. Chapter 10. Then in the 160th year, Alexander the son of Antiochus Epiphanes went forth and conquered Ptolemais. They made him welcome, and he reigned there. But when Demetrius the king learned this, he gathered a huge army and went out to battle him. Demetrius also sent a letter to Jonathan with peaceful words to flatter him. For he said, "Let us act with foresight to make peace with him before he sides with Alexander against us. For he will recall the evils we carried out against him and against his brothers and his nation." So the king gave authority to Jonathan to assemble an army, prepare weapons, and be his ally. He also ordered the hostages in the citadel to be released to him. Then Jonathan entered Jerusalem and read the letter in the presence of all the people and those in the citadel. They were very frightened when they heard the king had given Jonathan authorization to assemble an army. So the men in the citadel returned the hostages to Jonathan, and he brought them back to their parents. Soon Jonathan settled in Jerusalem and began to reconstruct the city. He also told the workers to build the walls to surround Mount Zion with square-cut stones for fortification, which they did. Then the foreigners who had been in their fortresses built the Bacchides field, who built in their fortresses built by Bacchides fled. Each one left his place and departed into his own land. Only some in Beth-zur who had forsaken the law and the commandments remained, for it was a place of refuge. When King Alexander heard about the proposals Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, he was told about the battles and the courageous deeds done by Jonathan and his brothers, as well as what they had suffered. And he said, "Where will we find another like this man? Let us make him our friend and our ally." So he wrote a letter and sent it to him, saying, "Alexander the king to Jonathan his brother, greetings. We have heard you are a mighty warrior and suitable to be our friend. So now we appoint you today as high priest of your people, and command that you be called a friend of the king." He also sent his purple robe and a golden crown. "We ask you to agree with our interests and maintain friendship with us." So Jonathan, in the 7th month of 160th year, put on the holy robe at the Feast of Tabernacles. Then he gathered his army and stockpiled many weapons. Demetrius the first writes to Jonathan. When Demetrius heard these reports, he was disturbed and said, "What is this that we have done? Alexander has upstaged us by forming a friendship with the Jews for support. I also will write these words of encouragement and promise them glory and gifts, that they may be my support." So he sent them the following message. "King Demetrius to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since you have kept your agreement with us and maintained our friendship and have not sided with our enemies, we have learned of this and rejoice. Even now, do continue to keep faith with us, and we will repay you good things for your deeds. We will grant you many prerogatives and give you gifts. At this time, I am releasing and exempting all Jews from tribute and salt taxes and from crown levies. Furthermore, instead of handing over to me a third of the harvest and half of the fruit of the trees, which I am due, I cancel them from this day forward and rejoice. And beyond, I will not extract from them those of Judah, nor from the 3 provinces annexed to them from Samaria and Galilee, from now on. In addition, let Jerusalem and her vicinities be set apart and released from these tithes and taxes. I am also releasing my control of the citadel in Jerusalem, and I give it to the high priest that he may place men in it whom he himself chooses to guard it. So every soul of the Jews taken captive from the land of Judah into all my kingdom I release freely without payment. Let all officials also cancel the duties on their livestock. Moreover, all the feasts, the Sabbaths, the new moons, and appointed days, as well as the 3 days prior to the feast and 3 after the feast, let all these days be established as exempt and released for the Jews in my kingdom. No one will have the power to exact anything from them or to trouble any of them about anything. Let the number of Jews in the army of the king be limited to 30,000 men, and let the stipend that is due to all the troops of the king be paid to them. Some of them are to be established in the great fortresses of the king, and some are to be set in positions of trust wherever the kingdom has need. Let their officers and leaders be taken from them, and let them live by their own laws, as the king commanded in the land of Judah. As for the 3 provinces added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be considered as one, so it may not be subject to any other authority than the high priest. I have given Ptolemais and the land adjoining it as gifts to the sanctuary in Jerusalem for regular expenses in the sanctuary. I also grant 15,000 silver shekels yearly out of the king's revenues from the appropriated places, even all the surplus the officials did not pay us in the first years. From now on, they will give for the works of the temple. Moreover, the first 1,000 shekels of silver which officials received every year from the incomes of the sanctuary, these are also cancelled because they belong to the priests who minister there. Further, whoever takes refuge at the temple in Jerusalem or in any of its vicinities because he owes a royal payment or any debt, let him be released and receive back all his property in my kingdom. The expense of rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary is also to be paid from the king's revenue. Then, too, the expenses of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the fortifications around it are to be paid from the king's revenue, and also the rebuilding of the walls in Judea. Offer rejected, Demetrius killed. But when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs Demetrius had done in Israel and how badly he had afflicted them. So they favored Alexander, because he was the first to offer peaceful words to them. Therefore they remained allied with him all his days. Now King Alexander assembled a large army and took position opposite, and the army of Demetrius fled. Alexander took pursuit and defeated them. He fought very hard until sunset, and Demetrius fell on that day. Alexander weds Cleopatra. Then Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, with the following message. Since I returned to my kingdom and have taken the throne of my fathers and established my rule, for I defeated Demetrius, and I secured control of my country, I faced him in war, and he and his forces were destroyed by us, and we indeed have sat down upon the throne of his kingdom. Now let us build a friendship with each other. Give me your daughter in marriage, and I will become your son-in-law. I will give you gifts worthy of both you and her. Then Ptolemy the king answered, saying, It was a good day when you went back to your father's homeland and occupied the throne of your kingdom. Now I will do for you what you request, so meet me at Ptolemais, that we may see each other, and I will be your father-in-law as you asked. Then Ptolemy left Egypt along with his daughter Cleopatra, and reached Ptolemais in the 162nd year. King Alexander met him there, and Ptolemy gave him his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. He celebrated her wedding in Ptolemais with great pageantry in royal manner. Jonathan made governor. Then King Alexander wrote for Jonathan to meet him, so he journeyed with splendor to Ptolemais, and there met the two monarchs. He offered them silver and gold, and gave their friends numerous gifts. Thus he found favor with them. Then some troublemakers from Israel, lawless men, also gathered against Jonathan and accused him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king then gave command to remove Jonathan's clothes and robe him in purple, and they did. Then the king seated him with himself and said to his leaders, Go out with him into the midst of the city and proclaim that no one should accuse him concerning any matter, and let no one trouble him for any cause. So it was that when his accusers saw the honor given him according to the proclamation, and saw him robed in purple, they fled. Thus the king honored him and inscribed him among his close friends. He also appointed him general and provincial governor. Then Jonathan departed to Jerusalem with peace and gladness of heart. Demetrius II appoints Apollonius. Now in the 165th year, Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, traveled from Crete to the land of his fathers. When King Alexander heard it, he was very distressed and went back to Antioch. Then Demetrius appointed Apollonius governor of Syria. Apollonius gathered a large army and marched against Jamnia. He sent word to Jonathan the high priest, saying, You alone rose up against us, but I was ridiculed and disgraced because of you. Why do you maintain authority over us in the hill country? Now therefore, if you trust in your army, come down against us in the plain, let us judge together for ourselves there, for I have an army of the cities. Inquire and learn who I am and the others who help us. They tell us there is no place for your foot to stand before us, because your fathers were put to flight twice in their land. Even now you shall not be able to withstand such a cavalry and army in the plain, where there is neither stone nor pebble nor any place to flee. Jonathan defeats Apollonius. But when Jonathan heard these words of Apollonius, he was moved to action. He chose 10,000 men and departed from Jerusalem, and his brother Simon joined to help him. He took up a position at Joppa, but the men of that city shut its gates, for Apollonius had a band of soldiers in Joppa. So Jonathan attacked them. Then the men of Joppa became fearful and opened the gates, and Jonathan captured Joppa. When Apollonius got word of it, he gathered 3,000 cavalry and sizable army and marched into Azotus, as though he were going beyond. But he went ahead into the plain, since he had a large cavalry and trusted in it. Jonathan chased him to Azotus, and there the armies joined in battle. But Apollonius secretly had left 1,000 cavalry behind. Jonathan discovered there was an ambush behind him, for they encircled his army and shot arrows at his troops from morning till sundown. But his army stood their ground, as Jonathan had ordered, and their cavalry grew tired. Then Simon brought in his army and confronted the phalanx in battle, for the cavalry had grown tired, and they were crushed by him and fled. When the cavalry was scattered on the plain, they retreated to Azotus, entering Beth Dagon, their pagan temple, to hide. Then Jonathan set Azotus and the surrounding cities on fire and took spoils from them. The temple of Dagon and those who took refuge in it were burnt up in the fire. So 8,000 men fell by the sword, along with those who were killed by the fire. Then Jonathan left there and camped opposite Ashkelon, and the men of the city came out with great ceremony to meet him. Jonathan and the men with him later went back to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus when King Alexander heard these reports, he proceeded to honor Jonathan again. So he sent him a golden buckle, as was customary to give to the relatives of kings. He also gave him Ekron and all the regions as his possession. Chapter 11. Ptolemy IV, Alexander die. Then the king of Egypt gathered together a large army like sand along the seashore, and many ships, and he sought to obtain possession of Alexander's kingdom by deceit, and to add to it his kingdom. So he set out for Syria with words of peace, and those from the cities were open to him and met with him, because King Alexander ordered them to meet him, since he was his father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the cities, he set a band of soldiers in every city. But when they neared Azotus, they showed him the temple of Dagon, which had been burned, and Azotus and the surrounding fortifications that were destroyed, and the bodies of those lying about whom Jonathan had burnt in the war, for they made heaps of them in his path. They also told the king that what Jonathan had done, so as to blame him, but the king remained silent. Jonathan then met the king in Joppa with great ceremony, and they greeted each other and stayed the night there. Jonathan journeyed with the king to the river Eleutherus, and then went back to Jerusalem. Thus King Ptolemy ruled over the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea. He devised evil plans against Alexander, who was his son-in-law, as we know. So he sent ambassadors to King Demetrius, saying, "Come, let us enter into a covenant with one another. I will give you my daughter Alexander's wife in marriage, and you will reign over your father's kingdom. For I regret giving him my daughter, since he tried to kill me." Thus Ptolemy blamed Alexander because he desired his kingdom. So he took back his daughter and gave her to Demetrius. Therefore he was estranged from Alexander, and their animosity was evident. Then Ptolemy entered Antioch and assumed the crown of Asia. So he wore 2 crowns on his head, that of Egypt and that of Asia. But King Alexander was in Cilicia at this time, for the inhabitants there were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he engaged him in battle. So Ptolemy went out with a mighty force and faced him, putting him to flight. Then Alexander took refuge in Arabia, seeking safety. King Ptolemy was held in great honor, so Zabdiel, the Arab, cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. But King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his garrisons in the fortresses were destroyed by the inhabitants of those fortresses. Thus, in the 167th year, Demetrius became king. Jonathan finds favor with Demetrius II. In those days, Jonathan gathered men from Judea to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war for use against it. But some lawless men who despised their nation came to the king and told him Jonathan would set siege to the citadel. When the king heard this, he was enraged, and he broke camp and went to Ptolemais. He wrote Jonathan that he was to lift the siege and to meet him in Ptolemais at once for a conference. But when Jonathan heard this, he issued orders to continue the siege. Then he chose some elders of Israel and some priests and put himself in danger, for he took silver, gold, clothing, and many other friendly gifts and went to the king in Ptolemais. And Jonathan found favor with him. Again, some lawless men from the nation accused Jonathan, but the king did to him as those before him had done and exalted him in front of all his friends. He also confirmed him in the high priesthood and whatever other honors he held before, and considered him as one of his best friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to exempt Judea from taxes, along with the 3 provinces and Samaria, and promised him 300 talents. The king was pleased and wrote Jonathan a letter concerning all these things. Its message was as follows. King Demetrius to his brother Jonathan and the nation of the Jews, greetings. The copy of this letter which we wrote to Lasthenes, our relative, concerning you, we have copied also to you, that you might know what it says. King Demetrius to his father Lasthenes, greetings. To the nation of the Jews, our friends, and who do what is right towards us, we have decided to do good because of their goodwill towards us. We have established the borders of Judea for them and the 3 provinces of Aphairna, Lida, and Rathamim. They were added to Judea from Samaria, as well as the areas bordering them. All who offer sacrifices in Jerusalem we have released from the royal taxes, which the king received from them each year, from the harvest of the earth and the fruit of the trees. Any other payment due us from now on, from their tithes, the salt pits, and the crown taxes, from all these we grant release. None of these provisions will be cancelled from now on for all time. Now therefore take heed to make a copy of this, and let it be given to Jonathan and put in a notable place on the holy mountain. Jonathan aids Demetrius II. When King Demetrius saw that the land was peaceful before him and no one was opposing him, he dismissed his troops, each to their own place, except the foreign soldiers who he had recruited as mercenaries from the islands of the nations. So all the soldiers who had served his father hated him. Now Trypho formerly had been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the soldiers complained against Demetrius, so he approached Emmaus the Arab, who was rearing Antiochus, the young son of Alexander. He insisted that he hand Antiochus over to him, so as to make him king in place of his father. He told Emmaus everything Demetrius had done, and the hatred his troops had for him, and he remained there many days. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent to King Demetrius the request that he remove the soldiers in the citadel from Jerusalem, as well as those in the fortresses, for they were at war with Israel. Then Demetrius sent to Jonathan, saying, Not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will greatly honor you and the Jewish nation when I have the opportunity, and you will do rightly to send me soldiers who will ally with me, because all my troops have revolted. So Jonathan sent 3,000 very able men to him at Antioch. When they came to the king, he was very glad at their arrival. Then men from the city gathered within the city, 120,000 of them, and they wanted to kill the king. But the king fled into the palace, and those from the city seized the streets of the city, and they began to fight. So the king summoned the Jews for help, and they all rallied around him and dispersed throughout the city. On that day they killed about 100,000 men. They set the city on fire, took many spoils on that day, and rescued the king. When the men of the city realized the Jews had gained control of the city at will, they lost their courage and called out to the king with this request: "Restore the peace and make the Jews quit fighting us and the city." So they threw down their weapons and made peace. Then the Jews were honored before the king and before all those in the kingdom. After this they returned to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus King Demetrius ruled on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was peaceful before him. But he broke his word about everything he promised Jonathan. Thus he became estranged from him and did not repay Jonathan the favors he had done for him, but greatly afflicted him. Antiochus VI honors Jonathan. Later, Trypho returned and had with him the young boy Antiochus, who put on the crown and became king. All the troops who had cursed Demetrius gathered around him. They fought against Demetrius, who was put to flight. Trypho then captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. So Antiochus the younger wrote to Jonathan, saying, "I confirm you in the high priesthood, set you over the 4 provinces, and you will be one of the king's friends." He also sent him gold cups to serve with at table, and give him authority to drink from these, to dress in purple, and to wear a golden buckle. He then established Simon his brother as general from the ladder of Tyre to the boundary of Egypt. Then Jonathan departed and journeyed beyond the river and in the cities. The entire army of Syria gathered around him as allies. When he went into Ashkelon, the people of the city met him and honored him. From there he left for Gaza, but when the inhabitants of Gaza shut him out, he besieged the city and surrounded fortifications and set its fortifications on fire and plundered them. Thus the men of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan. He made peace with them, took the sons of their governors as hostages, and dispatched them to Jerusalem. Then he traveled through the country, going as far as Damascus. Jonathan also got word the officers of Demetrius had arrived in Kadesh in Galilee with a sizable army. They intended to oust him from office. So he set out to meet them, but he left his brother Simon in the country. Then Simon positioned himself at Beth-zur, and for many days fought against it and blocked it off. Then the people begged him for peace, and he granted it to them. So he cast them out from there, took possession of the city, and placed a garrison in it. Now Jonathan and his soldiers camped by the lake of Gennesaret, that's the Sea of Galilee, of course, and rose early the next morning and marched to the plain of Hazor. And then, behold, the foreign army met him in the plain and set up an ambush against him in the mountains, but they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in the ambush rose up from their places and joined the battle. All Jonathan's men fled. None of them remained except Mattathias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Calphi, commanders of the armed forces. So Jonathan tore his garments, poured earth on his head, and prayed. Then he turned back to the battle and put the enemy to flight. When Jonathan's men who had run away saw this, they returned and joined him in the pursuit of the enemy as far as Kadesh, and there they set up camp. As many as 3,000 of the foreign army fell that day. Then Jonathan went back to Jerusalem. Chapter 12. Friendship renewed with Rome and Sparta of Greece. We find out here the Spartans were actually Hebrews, from the root of Abraham. Chapter 12. Friendship renewed with Rome and Sparta. When Jonathan saw the time was right, he chose envoys and sent them to Rome to validate the renewed friendship with them. Also he sent letters to Sparta and other locations for the same reasons. So they left for Rome, entered the Senate chamber, and said, "Jonathan the high priest and the nation of the Jews sent us here to renew the former friendship and alliance between ourselves." Then the Romans wrote letters to the citizens in every place so they might send forth the ambassadors to the land of Judah in peace. This is the copy of the letters which Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. Jonathan the high priest, the elders of the nation, the priests and the Jewish people to their brothers, the Spartans, greetings. Sometime earlier, letters were sent to Onias the high priest by Arius, who ruled over you, that you are our brothers, as the attached copy indicates. Onias received the envoy with honor, and he accepted the letters, which plainly showed the alliance and friendship. Therefore, although we do not need these things, since we have the holy books in our hands, we have decided to send and renew our brotherhood and friendship, so we would not be estranged from you for significant time has elapsed since you sent word to us. Therefore, at every opportunity, both on feast days and ordinary days, we remember you unceasingly in the sacrifices we offer and in our prayers, and it is right and proper to remember brothers, for we rejoice in your glory. But many troubles and many wars have surrounded us, and the kings around us have fought against us. We did not wish to trouble you and our allies and our friends with these wars, for we have had help from heaven assisting us, for we were freed from our enemies, and they were humbled. Therefore we chose Numenius, the son of Antiochus, and Antipater, son of Jason, to send them to Rome to renew our friendship, our former friendship and alliance with them. We also ordered them to go to you to greet you and give you these letters from us concerning the renewal of our brotherhood. Now then, please send us a reply. This is the copy of the letter sent them by Onias. King Arius of the Spartans to Onias the high priest, greetings. It has been put in writing regarding both the Spartans and the Jews that they are brothers and are both of the family of Abraham. So now that we know this, please write us concerning your welfare. Thus we are writing to you that your cattle and possession are ours, and ours are yours. Therefore we order our ambassadors to report to you accordingly. Campaigns of Jonathan and Simon. Then Jonathan heard the officers of Demetrius had come back with a larger army than before to make war against them, so he marched out of Jerusalem and engaged them in the area around Hamath, giving them no chance to invade his country. So he sent out spies to their encampment. They later returned and told him the army of Demetrius planned to attack the Jews at night. At sunset, Jonathan ordered those with him to stay awake and to be ready with their weapons for a fight during the night. Then he sent out an advance guard to surround the camp. When the enemy got word that Jonathan and his soldiers were ready for battle, they were terrified at heart. So they lit fires in their camp and fled. But Jonathan and his men did not know this until it was morning, for they saw the firelight. So Jonathan chased after them, but could not overtake them, because they crossed over the Eleutherius river. Then Jonathan turned aside against the Arabs, called Zabadeans, and struck them and took their spoils. He then broke camp and marched to Damascus and throughout all that country. Meanwhile, Simon went out and marched as far as Ashkelon and the fortresses nearby, and turned aside to Joppa and captured it, for he heard they wished to hand over the fortress to the men sent by Demetrius. So he established a garrison there to guard it. When Jonathan returned, he assembled the leaders of the people, and together they decided to build fortresses in Judea and to make the walls of Jerusalem even higher and raise a great high wall between the citadel and the city to separate it from the city. So it would be isolated, and its garrison could not buy or sell, nor sell goods. So they assembled to rebuild the city and part of the wall on the valley to the east that had fallen. Thus he repaired the wall that is called Kephanatha. Simon also built Adida in the Shephelah. They fortified it and set up bolted gates. Jonathan captured, troops killed. Then Trypho sought to rule Asia, to wear the crown and to stretch forth his hand against King Antiochus. He also took precautions lest Jonathan would not permit it, but wage war against him. So seeking to capture and destroy him, he marched forth to Beth Shan. Then Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 soldiers chosen for battle, and he came to Beth Shan. When Trypho saw he had come with a large army, he was afraid to stretch forth his hand against him. So he received him honorably and met him with all his friends. He gave gifts to Jonathan and ordered his friends and his own troops to obey him as himself. Then he said to Jonathan, "Why have you troubled all these men? We are not at war. Now send them home, but choose a few soldiers for yourself to be with you. Then come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it over to you along with the rest of the fortresses and the remaining troops and officers. Then I will turn around and go home, for this is why I came here." So Jonathan believed Trypho, and did as he said, and sent away the troops, who departed for the region of Judah. But he kept 3,000 soldiers with him, 2,000 of which he left in Galilee, and 1,000 who went with him. But when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the men of the city shut the gates and captured him, and they slew with the sword all who entered with him. Then Trypho met soldiers and cavalry into Galilee. Then Trypho sent soldiers and cavalry into Galilee and the great plain to kill all Jonathan's men. But when the soldiers learned that Jonathan and those with him had been captured and killed, they encountered each other to keep marching in close formation ready for attack. But when the pursuers saw them ready to fight for their lives, they retreated. So they all came safely to the land of Judah and cried out for Jonathan and his men. They were exceedingly afraid, and all Israel mourned greatly. Then all the nations surrounding them tried to defeat them, saying, "There is none to lead them or to help them. Now then, let us wage war against them and erase them from memory." Chapter 13. Simon leads his people. Now Simon learned that Trypho had assembled a large army to march on the land of Judah and crush it. He saw the people were trembling with fear, so he went to Jerusalem and gathered everyone together. He encouraged them, saying, "You know what my brothers and I and my father's house have done concerning the laws in the sanctuary. You know, too, the wars and the crises we have seen. This is why all my brothers perished, all for the sake of Israel, and only I am left. Now may my life never be safeguarded in time of trouble, for I am in no way better than my brothers. Thus I will avenge my nation and this sanctuary and your wives and children, for all the nations have hatefully gathered to destroy us." Thus he rekindled the spirit of the people when they heard these words. They responded with a loud voice, saying, "You lead us in peace of Judas and your brother. Fight our wars, and we will do everything you tell us." So he gathered all the men to fight against a fighting age and rushed to finish the walls of Jerusalem. He fortified the city on all sides. Then he sent Jonathan, son of Absalom, with a sizable army to Joppa, and he drove out all his people who remained there. Trypho kills Jonathan. Meanwhile, Trypho left from Ptolemais with a large force to come into the land of Judah. Jonathan accompanied him under guard. Now Simon set up camp in Adida, opposite the plain. Then Trypho heard that Simon had risen up in place of his brother Jonathan and was about to face him in battle. He sent men to him, saying, "We are detaining your brother Jonathan because of the silver he owed the royal treasury, and for which he is responsible. Now send 100 talents of silver and 2 of his sons as hostages, that when he is freed, he will not raise up against us. Then we will free him." Simon sensed they were speaking to him deceitfully, but he sent forth the silver and his sons, lest he arouse great hostility among the people, for they might say, "Because Simon did not give him the money, and the sons, Jonathan perished." Then he sent the sons and the 100 talents, but Trypho acted with deceit and would not free Jonathan. Later, Trypho arrived to invade Judah and destroy it, and they circled around the road leading to Adora, but Simon and his army advanced along opposite him every place that he went. The men from the citadel sent ambassadors to Trypho, urging him to come to them through the desert and send food for them. Trypho then prepared all his cavalry to come, but there was a heavy snowfall that night, and he could not march through the deep snow, and instead he departed and went into Gilead. But when he came near Bascama, he slew Jonathan and buried him there. Then Trypho turned and went to his own country. Simon sent men and gathered the remains of his brother Jonathan and buried him in Modin, the city of his fathers. All Israel mourned him with great lament for many days. Simon also built up the tomb of his father and brothers with polished stone in front and back, making it high enough to be seen. He then built 7 pyramids, one opposite the other, for his father and his mother and his 4 brothers. Around these pyramids he made engines of war, building massive pillars around them, and upon these pillars he placed suits of armor for perpetual memorial. And alongside the suits of armor he made carved ships, so they could be seen by everyone sailing the sea. This tomb, which he made in Modin, exists until this day. Demetrius II honors Simon. Now Trypho also dealt wickedly with young Antiochus, the king and murdered him. Then he became king in his place and wore the crown of Asia, bringing great adversity to the land. Simon thus strengthened the fortresses of Judea, surrounding them with high towers and with thick walls and gates and bolts, storing provisions in the fortresses. Also Simon selected men and sent them to King Demetrius to bring him relief for the country, for all Trypho's actions were violent. Then the king sent him a positive answer and wrote him this letter. King Demetrius to Simon, the high priest, friend of kings, and to the elders and the Jewish nation, greetings. We received the crown of gold and the palm branch you sent. We are ready to declare general peace with you and to order our officials to cancel your taxes. Indeed, all the grants we made to you stay intact, and let the fortresses you built remain in your keeping. We also forgive the mistakes committed up to the present day as well, and remove the crown tax you owe. If any other tax has been exacted in Jerusalem, let it be no longer exacted. If some of your men are suited for enrollment in our bodyguard, let them be enrolled, and may there be peace among us. The yoke of the Gentiles was lifted from Israel, and in the 170th year, then the people began to record in their letters and contracts, in the first year of Simon, the great high priest and commander and ruler of the Jews. Simon secures Gazara and Jerusalem. In those days, Simon captured Gazara, surrounding it with soldiers. He also built an engine of war, brought it to the city, and struck and seized one tower. Then the men in the siege tower jumped out and ran into the city, and there was a great commotion in Gazara. And the men in the city also climbed up into the wall with their wives and children, tearing their clothes and crying with a loud voice, pleading with Simon to make peace with them. They said, treat us not according to our evil deeds, but according to your mercy. So Simon made an agreement with them and ceased waging war against them, but he cast them out of the city and purified the house that contained idols. Thus he encouraged Gazara with hymns and blessings. He also cast out all uncleanness from it, and settled men there who would keep the law. Then he fortified it and built a dwelling place there for himself. But the men in the citadel at Jerusalem were perverted from coming and going in the region to buy and to sell. So they were extremely hungry. Even the strong among them were dying of hunger. When they called out to Simon to be at peace with them, he did so and then cast them out from there, purifying the citadel from its defilements. They entered it on the 23rd day of the second month of the 171st year with praise and palm branches, and with lyres, cymbals, and stringed instruments, and with hymns and song, because a great enemy had been defeated and cast out of Israel. Thus Simon ordered that each year they should commemorate this day with jubilation. When the Temple Mount was fortified along with the citadel, he himself and his men lived there. Then Simon noted that his son John had reached adulthood, so he appointed him commander of all the army, and he lived in Gazara. Chapter 14, a tribute to Simon. Then in the 172nd year, King Demetrius gathered his troops and went into Media to enlist help for himself to wage war against Trypho. When Arsaces, king of Persia and Media, learned that Demetrius had entered his borders, he sent one of his officers to capture him alive. So he sent out and attacked the camp of Demetrius, and captured him and brought him to Arsaces, who put him in prison. The land of Judah was peaceful all the days of Simon, and he sought the good of his nation, and his leadership and his glory pleased him all his days. Then in all his glory he took Joppa for a harbor, and made an entrance to the islands of the sea. He enlarged his nation's borders and gained control of his country. He also gathered many captives and ruled Gazara and Bethzur and the citadel. When he removed from it the uncleanness, no one opposed him. They farmed their lands in peace, and the land gave forth its produce, and the trees of the plain their fruit. Elders sat in the streets, talking together of good things, and the young men wore their glories and apparel of war. He supplied the cities with food and furnished them with weapons of defense, until his fame spread to the ends of the earth. He established peace in the land, and Israel rejoiced with great delight. Each one sat under his vine and fig tree, and no one made them afraid. He caused war to cease in the land, and the kings were defeated in those days. He fortified all the humble among his people. He demanded adherence to the law, and removed all the lawless and evil men. He beautified the sanctuary and multiplied the vessels of the sanctuary. Alliances renewed with Rome and Sparta. When it was heard in Rome, and as far away as Sparta, that Jonathan had died, they were in great sorrow. But when they heard that his brother Simon had been made high priest in his place, and was ruling over the land, and the cities in it, they wrote to him on bronze plaques to renew the friendship and alliance they had built with him and with his brothers Judas and Jonathan. These tablets were read before all the people gathered in Jerusalem. This is a copy of the letters the Spartans sent. The leaders and the city of the Spartans to Simon, the high priest, and the elders and the priests, and to all the Jewish people. Our brothers, greetings. The ambassadors who were sent by you to our people told us about your glory and honor, and we are overjoyed at their coming. So we recorded what was said by them in our public decrees as follows. Numenius, son of Antiochus, and Antipater, the son of Jason, ambassadors of the Jews, came to renew their friendship with us. Our citizens were pleased to receive them honorably and to place a copy of their words in the public archive so the people of the Spartans might have a record of them. They also sent a copy of this to Simon, the high priest. Later, Simon dispatched Numenius to Rome with a large gold shield that weighed 1,000 minas to verify the alliance with them. A bronze plaque for Simon. The people heard these words, and they said, "How can we show our gratitude to Simon and his sons? For he, his brothers, and his father's house stood strong and waged war with the enemies of Israel by themselves and secured her freedom." So they wrote these words on bronze tablets and put them on the pillars on Mount Zion. And this is a copy of what they wrote. On the 18th day of Elul, in the 172nd year, which is the third year of the great high priest Simon in the court of God's people, at the large gathering of the priests and people and the rulers of the nation and elders of the land, the following was made known to us. Since there have often been wars in the country, Simon, the son of Mattathias, priest of the sons of Joarib, with his brothers, placed themselves at risk and opposed their nation's adversaries so their sanctuary and the law would be protected. And they honored their nation with great glory. Jonathan also rallied their nation and was made their high priest and was brought before his people. When their adversaries chose to invade their country and seize their sanctuary, Simon set out to wage war for his country. He spent large amounts of his own money and supplied weapons to the soldiers in his nation's army and paid them wages. Thus he strengthened the cities of Judea, Beth-zur, on the boundary of Judea, where the weapons of the enemy were kept, and he established there a garrison of Jews. He also strengthened Joppa by the sea and Gazara on the boundary of Zotus, where the enemy had previously lived. He moved the Jews there and supplied them with whatever they needed for their welfare. When the people saw Simon's dependability and the glory he was committing to bring to his nation, they chose him as their ruler and high priest because he did all these things and because of the righteousness and good faith he kept towards his nation. In every way he tried to honor his people. Under his rule everything he touched prospered, and he drove out the Gentiles from the land, the men in the city of David in Jerusalem, and made a citadel for themselves from which they went out and defiled the vicinity of the sanctuary and caused great harm to its purity. Then he settled Jews in it and strengthened it for the sanctuary of the country and the city, and built up the walls of Jerusalem to greater heights. In light of these accomplishments, King Demetrius established him in the high priesthood. He also made him one of his friends and showed him great honor, for he heard the Jews were called friends, allies, and brothers by the Romans, in that they had received Simon's ambassadors with honor. Thus the Jews and the priests were pleased that Simon should be their ruler and high priest forever, until a faithful prophet should rise. They were also pleased that he should be their governor, and take responsibility for the sanctuary and choose workers to meet its needs and to look after the country, the weapons, and the fortresses. Indeed, they decided he should look after the sanctuary and be obeyed by all, that all the contracts of the nations should be drafted with his signature, and that he should be vested in purple and gold. None of the people or the priests were to be allowed to repeal any of these things or say anything in opposition to him, or hold an assembly of the people without him, or be clothed in purple, or wear a golden buckle. Anyone who should do anything contrary to these decisions or nullify any of them was to be held liable. All the people resolved that Simon should act according to these decisions, so Simon consented, agreeing to become the high priest and to be the governor and ethnarch of the Jews and priests and the guardian of all. They commanded that this decree be inscribed on bronze tablets and be put in the public place near the sanctuary. Copies were also placed in the treasury, accessible to Simon and his sons. Chapter 15. Antiochus the seventh seeks Simon's help. Antiochus the seventh seeks Simon's help. Chapter 15. Then Antiochus, son of King Demetrius, sent a letter from the islands of the sea to Simon, the high priest and ethnarch of the Jews, and to all the nation. It contained the following: Antiochus the king to Simon, high priest and ethnarch, and the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since certain troublemakers gained the mastery over the kingdom of our fathers, I wish to lay claim to the kingdom so I can establish it as it was before. I have recruited a multitude of troops and prepared warships. I plan to go throughout the nation, that I may pursue those who laid our country to ruin and desolated many of its cities. Now therefore I validate your tax remission, which the kings before me forgave you, and whatever other payments are remitted for you. I also authorize you to make your own coinage as money for your nation, and allow Jerusalem and the sanctuary to be free. All the weapons you prepared and the fortresses you built which you seized, let them remain with you. Every money you owe the royal treasury, as well as future debts, let them be remitted from now on and for all time. As soon as we regain control of our kingdom, we will honor you and your nation and the temple with great glory, that your glory may be evident in all the earth. In the 124th year, King Antiochus went to the land of his fathers, and all his soldiers went with him. Few sided with Trypho. When Antiochus went after him, he fled to Dora by sea, for he knew that calamity had come upon him. His armies deserted him. Then Antiochus set up camp opposite Dora with 120,000 fighting men and 8,000 cavalry. He encircled the city, and the ships joined the battle from the sea. So he pressed hard towards against the city by land and sea, and did not allow anyone to leave or enter. The Jews received Rome's support. Then Numenius and his men came from Rome with letters to the kings and their countries, in which the following was contained: Lysias, the Roman consul, to Ptolemy the king, greetings. The ambassadors of the Jews came to us as friends and allies to renew their long-standing friendship and alliance. They were sent from Simon the high priest and by the Jewish people, and brought a gold shield of 1,000 minas. Therefore it pleased us to write the kings and their countries that they not seek to hurt them or wage war against them and their cities and country, or form alliances with those who fight them. It seems right to accept the shield from them. If therefore any troublemakers have escaped from their country to you, give them over to Simon the high priest, that he might persecute them according to their law. The council wrote identical letters to King Demetrius in Natalis and Arathis and Arsaces, and to all the nations, to Samis and the Spartans, and to Delos, Mindos, Seion, Caria, Samos, Pamphylia, Lycia, Halicarnassos, Rhodes, Phaselis, Kos, Side, Arados, Gortina, Snidus, Cyprus, and Cyrene. They also sent a copy to Simon the high priest. Antiochus VII turns to Simon. Meanwhile, King Antiochus besieged Dora a second time, repeatedly launching his forces against it and building engines of war. He put Trypho in confinement so he could neither go out or go in. Then Simon sent Antiochus 2,000 chosen men as allies, along with silver, gold, and considerable weaponry. But Antiochus decided not to accept these things. He broke all the former agreements he had made with Simon, becoming estranged from him. Then he sent Athenovius, one of his friends, to confer with him, saying, You control Joppa, Gazara, and the citadel in Jerusalem. They are cities of my kingdom. You desolated their territory and caused great damage in the land, and you rule over many places in my kingdom. Now therefore give back the cities you took and the taxes from the places you rule outside the boundaries of Judea. Otherwise give me 500 talents of silver for them, as well as 5,000 talents more for the destruction you caused, and for the tribute of the cities, or else we will wage war and defeat you. When Athenovius, the friend of the king, entered Jerusalem, he saw the glory of Simon and the sideboard plated with gold and silver, a magnificent display. He stood amazed. Then he reported the words of the king to him. Thus Simon answered and said to him, We have not taken any foreign land, nor have we captured foreign property, but only the inheritance of our fathers, which years ago was seized unjustly by our adversaries. But now that we have occasion, we are holding firmly to the inheritance of our fathers. And as for Joppa and Gazara, which you want, their people were causing great damage to our people in our country, for they will give you 100 talents. Athenovius said not a word in reply, but returned to the king in anger. When he relayed to him these words, plus Simon's splendor and everything he witnessed, the king was extremely enraged. Now Trypho had boarded a ship and escaped to Orthosia, so the king made Sendebeos his commander-in-chief of the seacoast and gave him infantry soldiers and cavalry. He then ordered him to encamp opposite Judea, and further ordered him to build Kedron and strengthen its gates and to wage war against the people. But the king himself pursued Trypho. When Sendebeos arrived in Jamnia, he began to harass the people. He also invaded Judea, took people captive, and killed them. Then he built up Kedron and stationed cavalry and soldiers there, so they could march through the roads of Judea, making roads as the king commanded him. Chapter 16. Simon's sons defeat Sendebeos. Then John traveled from Gazara and told his father Simon the damage Sendebeos was inflicting. So Simon called his two eldest sons, Judas and John, and said to them, My brothers and I and my father's house have fought Israel's battles for our youth until this very day. Things have gone well for us, so as to rescue Israel many times over. Now I have become old, and you by his mercy are men of maturity. Take over my position and my brother's role, and go fight for our country, and may the help sent from heaven be yours. Thus John chose 20,000 fighting men and cavalry from the country. Together they marched towards Sendebeos and encamped overnight in Modim. They arose early, marching to the plain. Behold, a huge army was marching out to meet them, infantry and cavalry, and there was a stream between them. John and his army faced off against them, and when he saw that his troops were afraid to ford the stream, he crossed first. His soldiers saw him and crossed behind him. He then divided up the men, putting the cavalry in the middle of the infantry, for the enemy's cavalry was very large. When they sounded the trumpet, Sendebeos and his army were routed, and numbers of them fell wounded. The rest of them fled into the fortress. Then Judas, the brother of John, was wounded, but John pursued them until Sendebeos reached Kedron, where he had done construction. When they ran into the towers of the fields of Azotus, John set them afire, and roughly 2,000 of their men perished. Then he returned to Judea in peace. John succeeds Simon. Now Ptolemy, the son of Abubus, had been made governor to rule over the plain of Jericho. He had large hoards of silver and gold, for he was the son-in-law of the high priest. He was optimistic and full of determination to seize control of the country. So he developed an evil strategy to seize Simon and his sons by trickery. Now Simon was paying a visit to the cities throughout the country, concentrating on their needs. So he went down to Jericho along with his sons Mattathias and Judas, and in 177th year, in the 11th month, the month of Shebat, the son of Abubus received them with his seat in the little fortress called Doc, which he had erected, and he gave them a grand feast and hid the men there. So when Simon and his sons became drunk, Ptolemy and his soldiers emerged and grabbed their weapons. When they encountered Simon in the banquet hall, they murdered him along with his two sons and certain of his servants. Indeed, Ptolemy committed great treachery, returning evil for good. Ptolemy then drafted a report to the king about these things and asked that he might send him soldiers to help to secure their country and cities. He also dispatched soldiers to Gazara to seize John and send letters to the military tribunes to come to him, so he might give them silver, gold, and gifts. Then he sent others to capture Jerusalem and the Temple Hill, but somebody ran ahead and told John in Gazara that his father and his brothers had been killed, and that he had sent men to kill you as well, he said. When John heard this, he was deeply shocked. He captured the soldiers who came to crush him and killed them, for he discovered they were there to kill him. The rest of John's words and his war history and brave acts, which he did so courageously, plus the heightening of the walls which he built, and his other accomplishments, behold, they are written in the book of his high priesthood, from when he was first made high priest, following his father. And we'll continue with Maccabees 2, the next reading. And now we'll continue with the New Testament, 1 John, chapter 3. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him. For we shall see him as he is, and everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure. Whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. And you know that he was manifest to take away our sins, and in him there is no sin. Whoever abides in him does not sin. Whoever sins has neither seen him nor knows him. Little children, do not let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whoever has been born of God does not sin, for his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin because he has been born of God. Love one another. In this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother. For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil, and his brother's righteous. Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. Whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him. For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and knows all things. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence towards God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do these things that are pleasing in his sight. And this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son Jesus Christ, and love one another as he gave us commandment. Now he who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him, and by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. Chapter 4. The Spirit's Witness, the Incarnation. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of God. He who knows God hears us. He who is not of God does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. God redeems us in love. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love God does not know God, for God is love. In this the love of God was manifest towards us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. God abides in us. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in him, and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. And we have seen and testify that the Father has sent his Son as Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him, and he in God. And we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. Love overcomes fear. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so we are in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. Love of God means love of others. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar, for he does not love his brother whom he has seen. How can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also. And we'll continue with chapter 5 tomorrow. God bless you, and thank you for your support. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.